only for my, which is a little bit of time coming, but also the 30th anniversary of my Lord of Scoundrels, which is no words. I got no words, and I am never speechless. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Nina, for inviting me to get to hang with Loretta Chase. You know, I cannot ever say no to that.
I know.
And I regret nothing. Lucky, I do feel very lucky to be here talking with you. And I'm so excited to see all of you guys. Thank you so much for coming out, for braving the polar blast weather. But Loretta heats it up on the page for you, so it's worth your while, I think. So I'm just gonna get it out of the way first. This book was a while in coming.
Yeah.
So do you wanna tell us about the book and how the extra time made it even more amazing?
Well, I think, okay. Whatever was going on for all that time, the information was in my brain. I just couldn't get access to it. And when I finally broke through whatever the problem was, I thought, you are such an idiot. It was all there. You knew this about the character. You had notes about this. You had spreadsheets. What's the problem? But who knows? Who knows what the problem is? Some people never have writer's block, and some people have it periodically. And that's apparently what happened to me. It was just writer's block because the story was there. And then once I was able to get through that, I just was like, I love these people. They're just so interesting, and they're so difficult, and how am I, bringing them together is going to be so interesting. So it was a very weird experience that you go through years of having trouble writing things that are just garbage. Streams of words. I think most writers have had this experience. You've written pages and maybe it felt like it was going very smoothly, and then you go back and look at it and it's not good. Yes.
Crying as you do it.
Yeah, and also I killed so many trees because I have to look at the hard copy. And then when it broke through, all those problems just kind of dissolved, whatever it was, and the story started coming together and the people came alive. And I have these really interesting people and I love them all. Even the villain, because he's so creepy. So it's a very odd experience, basically.
Yeah.
But it came through. I got through. I didn't think I would.
I think sometimes people say, oh, you've written so many books, must be old hat now. No, I think it gets harder.
It gets harder
with every other book. But yeah, it is pretty magical when everything finally lines up. Like picking a lock. You get some of the tumblers lined up, but not all of them, and so you're like just as stuck as if you.
Okay, this is a story I would be interested in.
Open the door, like, yeah. And I have lots of stories about ways I cannot write a book. Many metaphors.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So in this series, to refresh my memory, I went back and reread 10 Things I Hate About the Duke. And one thing that really struck me was these heroes and heroines basically grew up together. So a number of the heroines, they knew their eventual happily ever after as a child, or at least a young person. And I think that it really struck me that was actually a key reason why they fell in love with them, because they're like, I knew you before you got wild and under the bad influence of your friends and kind of lost your mind.
Yeah.
And so
that's it. Yes, that's definitely something that came to me about the characters. And I think it was pretty clear from early on with the situations where you know people as children. And you're really good friends with them, or you trust them, or you have these bonds with them. And then they hit adolescence. And this is the experience parents have. Who is this alien in my house?
Where did my kid go?
Right. And that happens often that, and you think maybe you've outgrown that person, or they take a different direction in life. And then I thought it would just be so beautiful for them to come back together. And you find out that at the core, this person that you thought had changed in a bad way and was never going to come back to you, that lovely kid that you knew, that person has returned, and they're all grown up and they're better now. And I also like to think of my heroines as something about them brings out the best in the guy. Something about them encourages him to think about what he's doing or to change himself, because you can't change another person. But something about the heroine motivates that man to change his direction. And in the story, that all the men had a struggle to do that, because they've got that prior relationship among the three of them. And that was the thing I had to tackle with the third book. Because I knew in the back of my mind that relationship among the men was a problem. It was a problem the men had to deal with, and it was a problem the women had to deal with. And I think that was also part of, okay, how do I resolve this? Which thing is good. And you also don't want that to take over the story, because the story is essentially a love affair. There's so much going on with these people. Part of the struggle there was to keep things focused where they needed to be focused.
So that's definitely true. I find when you have a very tight-knit friend group in a series, or even just in books across series, like those friends are usually very interesting. And you don't want to downplay the friendships outside of, the romantic relationships. Right. Because I think those are a key part of what makes your characters who they are. But at the same time, like you said, the focus is supposed to be on the romantic relationship that's building and growing, and sometimes friends get in the way. Yeah, dastardly Dukes definitely got in each other's way. Yes.
So, and I think a lot of that was in the back of my mind when I wrote the first book, because I was thinking about the hero there, and he's been abroad. And in the back of my mind, I always knew he had gone abroad because that was the only way to get out of this and to refocus. And then he comes back, and when that story starts, he's back in the middle of it. And a Duke in shining armor. The first thing, he's just come back. He got away. He's had a new life. He's looked at things differently. He comes back and he's right back in that thing with his friends again. Yeah. So
But that's really interesting, because they weren't his friends. They were tighter than brothers. And so you must have known as soon as he came back that pull was going to be really strong, which is why I think you started it very brilliantly by having immediately have to chase off, leave them behind, go out the window, chasing this girl. He doesn't know. All he knows is she's not going to marry his friend. Wow, she really doesn't want to do this. She's jumping out the window in her wedding dress, running through the streets of London, and just chasing after her So I like that. And then in this last book, you kind of went the other way. They were together a lot more. She kind of saw him through his evolution with his friends, and and how it took them apart, but then also
when you're so here you are, you're married, but got this pull of this very important relation. I mean, the friendship among those three men, as I saw it, was what helped them survive, because they had problematic childhood, and with they really did consider themselves brothers, because they were sort of on their own, and I just pictured them at Eton, the first day at Eton, They don't know anyone, and there's bullies all over the place, and I thought, these guys started sticking up for one another from that point on, and that's really a strong thing. So that thing is very likely going to interfere with a marriage, depending on what's happening with the marriage and how do you resolve that pull if you feel responsible for your friends, but you also love your wife and you're responsible for your wife. How do you resolve that?
Especially if you go and marry the sister or one of those friends, like you are never getting away from him. You're gonna see that family every holiday, wedding.
Yeah. There's so many scenes in that book that I just love. I'm so happy about it. But it was like, after all the pain, thank you. Yeah.
So I have another theory that I would like you to confirm, and that is that you dreamed up this whole entire series and these dastardly dukes and their exasperated lady loves, so you can write about Lady Charles and Castor.
Yes.
I think I'm right.
Yeah.
Right? Anybody else?
Yes. She was right there from the beginning. I don't know what was. Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm working on her. Yes. Okay, here's a good question for the audience. So you have a couple that one's in her mid to late 40s and the man is in his early 50s. How about that as a romance?
Yes, please.
Yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah.
Make it hot.
It's already kind of hot between them. Yes.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I mean, like unbuttoning the blouse.
Yeah. I like having an older woman in the story anyway, and I just loved having her as a person who's, because she's so experienced in the world, she's been a courtier. So she's seen the best and the worst of people. She knows how to manipulate because that's what you have to do. And I wanted her to be like a little bit of a guiding human for this. And also someone who didn't take any nonsense, but there needed to be a guy over there who was irritating the living daylights out of her, who's maybe a little bit at cross purposes and maybe not. So yeah, she was there from the beginning. I thought of the house and then she moved in the house. I love that house.
It struck me as I was actually listening to the audiobook of and like every time she came on page, there was something. I think the narrator really liked her too, because the narrator's voice changed just very subtly. I was like, she really likes these scenes. These scenes are really good. And whenever Lord Frederick would be mentioned,
Yeah.
you could just tell the narrator is looking forward to
She's really good. On one of the books, she had actually emailed me and say, am I going to do the next book? And I was, well, of course, I would hope so.
Yeah.
Why would you not? But she's wonderful. Kate is a marvel to me. How you do that? Get the different personalities coming across just in your voice. That's such a talent, and she does it so well.
Yes, I never did audiobooks until the pandemic started, and then discovered Libby had them from the library. I was like, okay, I'll try it. And yeah, narrator is essential.
Yeah.
Anyway, you should hold on to that one.
I don't have that much say about it, so, but
No,
when I
you
do.
you do. You write to your editor and you say, I demand. I'm not producing the book until you write back and tell me.
Then I'm going to get some inspiration to get this whole story together. I have had ideas, but they haven't come together yet.
For those who don't know, I love plotting other people's books. Fun, the work for me.
You'll be getting a lot of calls with Lars.
You are on my wait list. So, okay, so now, you've got these three, devilish dukes married off. And only Big Charles is waiting. What seeds do you have percolating for the future? Do you have any previews or any interest now? Okay, right. I'll stop asking then. What are you gonna do in London?
No, it's a blank. It's usually blank until I feel like that there's something there for me to start with, but right now I don't. And I have to say there are circumstances beyond my control in another part of this country that have affected my thinking. So that I think I have to deal with that a little bit. But one thing that's happened to me is from the pandemic on, I've been hearing from readers about the value of these historical romances and how important they are in people's lives, particularly when things are not happening the way they wish that they were happening in the world. And so that has been a strong reminder to me to keep at it, even if you're having a horrible time, even if you want to throw your laptop through the window, that there's a value in what you're doing. So that's been a thing to make me. Sometimes I want to run away. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times people talk about certainly genre fiction as escapism, right? You know, if you read a mystery, the killer is gonna get caught and go to jail. If you read a romance, they're gonna make it work and be together happily ever after, which isn't always what the real world provides. So they call it escapism, but I think it's even, I don't know, it's deeper than that.
It's a safe place.
It is. And I don't read horror, but I was listening to somebody talk about it, a horror author, and they said they thought horror was a way that the reason people love reading horror books that like scare the pants off you is it's kind of a way to face and imagine coping with very scary and terrifying things, but knowing that you're actually safe. Okay, I get that. So, you know, hopefully doing the right thing and, you know, believing in love will people get through the scarier parts of real life.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we do. We're lucky. We know how to do this. We know how to write these books, even though sometimes we feel like we can't do it very well. But yes, there's a value in it. And the put downs, the dismissal of romance, just ridiculous to me because it's so valuable in people's lives. And I'm fine with the escapism thing.
Oh, everybody needs that from time to time.
Why not?
Sure, I don't.
Yeah, and why particularly romance? Are talking about romance being escapism? What about every other book? I mean, you're going into a different place. You're in another world. Whatever the genre is, that's what reading is. You learn, and you're also taken to another place, into someone else's head. And it's fascinating.
I agree, honestly. And I think it's really interesting right now with historical romance, just having a relatively difficult moment in the market, going through some
Palpitation.
dire palpitation. Yeah, I think it's in a real full-on swoon at this point. But at the same.
Yeah, which I was gonna say, that's kind of too bad because people are doing such interesting things.
Right,
Yes.
right. I feel just as it's really opening up and exploring things that the real publishers were not interested in. It's like, no, now is when it's really getting good.
Yeah, I mean, when I started in this business, which was way back in the last century, you couldn't write a romance about World War II. No one was interested in anything, even late Victorian. They didn't want Edwardian. You were kind of stuck either medieval or Regency. And now people have been writing in so many different eras and doing such interesting work. And it's not, it's dying, it's not alive. But from the perspective, again, of someone who's been writing forever, we've gone through this before. And it goes like this. Yeah. So it's hard on the people who are just entering historical romance. It's difficult for them because they're trying to get a footing in. It's hard for them. But I know from
You mean authors?
authors,
You're talking about
yes.
authors getting started.
Yes, and I think that's a problem, but I think eventually we're gonna see ourselves go back on the upswing again, and that's been I mean, my agent, who's pretty cynical. She's like, yeah, this happens. So my concern is for the new authors rather than the.
Yeah, I mean, that's always been a thing, like, I know, I recently discovered Reddit. But there's a historical romance forum that I haunt, and I am very interested to see what books people talk about and who they recommend. And I see a number of authors and people say, oh, whatever happened to so-and-so, whatever happened to Cecilia Grant, loved her books, amazing books, why aren't there more? Like, this has kind of always happened, that the market has been cruel to
Yes.
a lot of very, very good authors. And the reason a lot of those people aren't writing anymore, so I started 20 years ago. First book. It's aged.
Yeah,
Gray hairs. But you're the legend. You've been here forever, and you're going to be here forever, writing a new book every year. I swear to me. I need it. Like, Loretta was a legend when I started. Iconic is just. I remember doing the first book sign, one of the very first book signings I ever did. It was large. There were like, I don't know, 7 or 8 authors, and you were one of them. You walked in, and I just stood there like.
My husband too, he just calls me legend.
Like Loretta Legend. But it's not. I think it's a real, like, part of what I was getting at in my totally aimless way was that this is a tough business. And I mean, part of, success is like just enduring and hanging on. You have not only hung on for at least 30 years, you've done amazing. Like, you're brilliant at this. And I am so glad that you're still writing, because I do see a lot of authors, even ones who are excellent and really deserve a wider audience, like, they don't make it.
Yeah.
So
It's random.
yep, a lot of luck.
Yes. So, I mean, self-publishing has been helpful in that regard. I know that a lot of the people who I started out with in the traditional regencies, they went through that horrible slaughter at some point. What was it, in the 90s or something?
Yeah.
And the publishers closed down all the Regency lines, and here are these people left without a publisher. But they started out gradually, reissuing their books on their own, and now they're self-publishing their books, and they're able to continue with their careers. So that has been a good thing for a lot of the authors.
Yeah, I think
But it's work, right?
it's all work. I'm still trying to find the way that it's not work, and I spend probably too much time trying to figure out how I could do this with less work.
Yeah.
End up making 4 times as much work.
Why can't I wake up tomorrow morning and have the whole story in my head?
Right. That would be so much easier.
Yeah.
You could just sit down and write a whole chapter.
Yeah.
Right. I need a drink. So yeah, I mean, self-publishing is definitely work, but on the other hand, there's nobody to say, no, you can't publish that. I don't know about you, but I've been told a number of times when I would submit in my outline, no, they're like, no, everything after page 3, you need to change that, and we don't want to hear about that in these books. And, you know, some of it was good stuff, like, you know, it would. For me, it's like when I find out about something, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna put that in a book. And so, you know, I read this fantastic book, and it was about the slave trading act and how Britain dealt with slave trade and their very gradual and however the process of getting rid of it. Not that we have any ground to stand on that, but you know, Britain did their thing, they did it earlier. And I was like, well, I'm gonna put some of this in the book because, you know, a lot of these big fortunes were made on slave labor, one way or another. Like some of it was African, some of it was like cruel conditions in mining. Publishers to know hear about that. They're like, how about some more ballroom scene? So I think self-publishing is wonderful in that there's nobody to say you can't put that in there. You can't put the Irish question, Catholic emancipation. You can't put you know, people from other countries in your stories and make them, you know, not just a side character like, oh, look, there's a token Indian person or whatever, but you know, there's a fully fledged character here. And the Regency, the real Regency world was much richer
Yes.
than.
But you got some in the last book, the Viscount book.
Yes, I did, but I self-published that. Nobody's taking it out now.
Yes, I like that. That was great.
Anyway, it was kind of like my cheerleading ad for historical romance in general. Like, oh, look at the indie authors.
Yes.
They're killing it. I should say we at this point.
Yeah. We'll see.
But all right, so wow, the Dastardly Dukes are done.
Yeah.
Are you gonna miss them? Or are they gonna pop up in Lady Charlotte?
Who knows?
I'm picturing her like running off to Rome. And Frederick having to pursue her. Introduce her in Italian palazzo.
Oh, talk to me some more.
There's a Roman bath that they go to. And I don't know, blah, blah, blah. Somebody steals the diamonds. They have to go on a road trip all over Italy.
Yeah.
Is it working? Well, I am very excited for Lady Charles and Buster because she, in my opinion, has stolen the show. Calm, steady presence. I love that she's a little bit older and has run out of F's to give about various things, but also still knows how to play the game.
Right.
Inspired with you.
Yeah, and she has an interesting backstory, so I'd like to get into that a little bit. Well, there've been hints of it in I think all the books that she did not marry her husband for love,
But it was happening.
but he made her happy. It was like, oh, yes.
And then he does.
And then he died. And said, oh, this poor woman, oh, I'm thinking she's gonna be mourning for a while. But then I think it was 10 Things I Hate About the Duke, she's emerged by then. But with this book, she's still part of the book, she's still isolated in her place. But this was, you get a sense of how this buildup, I hope, you get a sense of this buildup where she's like, finally, this is the last straw. I've got to go back to London. These kids are just screwing up.
I love that idea as well, that these boys that she knew as children and loved and cared for, and she's kind of watched them do their thing, and now she's at a point where she's like, all right, enough.
Yeah.
I've watched you make a mess of your life for long enough, and now I am wading in, and lots are gonna be big.
Yes, and I like that they're scared of her.
I also love that your heroines, they look up to her as well. You know, that she's a good figure in their lives, because romance in general, but specifically historical, has a tendency to the parents, the older figure, and I was like, and I get why, I know why, it's very powerful as a storytelling tool, like.
The orphans are, yeah, they're powerful, but I like to do the families. And because it's interesting to me, family dynamics are interesting, and it
Yes.
gives you a sense of where the character came from.
And I need somebody, I think, as like a, I guess, a sign that it is possible to get through this.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things I liked about, one in the 10 things I hate about the Duke, that the heroine's mother took a hand. And I thought, well, you know, that's what a mom would do if she.
Oh, yes, yes, the scene where she goes and confronts the fatty other lady
Yeah,
and is
Yes. Yeah, it was,
like. Woman to woman, we're gonna battle this out.
yeah. So sometimes the mothers are there and the fathers are there, and sometimes they're not, and I'm not gonna make all the fathers villainous. Sometimes the fathers are just confused. Which is
Exasperated.
exasperating.
Griffith.
Yeah. Yeah, imagine having that daughter, and you're a politician, and this is your daughter.
You know, actually, in that one, what struck me was the two sisters. It wasn't just Cassandra, it was her sister, whose name? Hyacinth, that's right.
Violet.
Oh, no. He's calling her Miss Flower. Flower. Yeah, I thought that was also an important relationship. And it seemed like in My Inconvenient Duke, Alice was a little more on her own. I thought. They were kind of showing like the different levels of support that women could have.
And in the original, and like in Shakespeare and Taming of the Shrew, the sisters are in conflict. There's a rivalry there. And one's like so perfect, the other one isn't. And I thought, well, what if the older sister really loves her? Little sister, and she wants the best for her. What about that relationship? So that was the other thing I wanted to turn around about that story, along with the misogyny.
I love both of those sisters, so thank you for them. All right, I know everybody's tired of hearing me talk, so does anybody have any questions? Yes, right there.
I'm a big audiobook person. Do you have any say as authors as to who reads it? Because lately they're oncoming AI generated and it's terrible. I've listened to them for years, so I know how English words. Very discouraging.
I didn't know about this. Who's doing it, guys? Oh, how horrible.
Yeah, very horrible.
What are they thinking? Oh, well,
They
it's
don't have to
publishing
pay them
anyway.
either.
Yeah, you know what they're thinking. Yeah, they don't have to pay them. Oh, that's horrible. I
choose Kate.
I didn't choose Kate. She was chosen.
I know
you
God reached down.
I'll narrate where she's going.
She said thank you.
I do over the ones to which I own the rights. But in that case, I was not asked about who was going to read it, who was going to do the audio. And in the beginning, Avon wasn't even that hot to do the audio. So I have audio rights to some of the others. But I haven't, my traditional regencies I did have a choice. They sent me samples of different narrators, and so I chose the person that I thought came the closest to what I wanted to hear. She's not up to Kate Redding's level, but I thought she did a really good job. But Kate's been the one that they've had to with. So I don't know.
Yeah, sometimes I've been, a couple of times I was asked, and it was always, here are 3 to choose from, so choice. And then, they would go with, sometimes they go with who's available. But, when you self-publish, it's up to you. And for myself, I really liked one of the narrators that had done several of my books when I published with Avon. And I actually just wrote her fan mail and was like, and so when I self-published, my own books, I emailed her and said, maybe this is crazy, and if it is, go ahead and hit delete, but could I pay you to narrate this other book that I wrote? And she was like, of course. So, yeah, with the self-publishing, you do have complete control. And it is wonderful. You can send them pronunciation guides and notes, like, this section, read it in total deadpan sarcasm, or whatever you want to do. But yeah, a lot of times the publishers just do whatever. The audio, the AI narration is, I don't know, have any of you guys heard it? Has anybody else heard it?
Samples.
Yeah, I've only listened to samples, and it sounds okay to me for a short period of time. But over the course of a whole chapter, it's like, no, there's something wrong here. This is a robot voice. But the way the big companies are trying to get people to use it now is they're letting you do it for free. So readers like cheap audiobooks, right? You have a choice between an audiobook that's $26.99 and one that's $6.99. You'll see the difference, but the AI narration is I don't think it will be free forever, and they'll start charging. And I think you can't copyright anything that's AI done. So that's another,
Well, for cheap audio, if you sign up with Chirp.
yeah. Chirp is like BookBub for audiobooks, you know that. But also, all you Massachusetts residents in here, you can get a free library card from the Boston Public Library, which has a very nice size catalog, and you can check it right out.
You can connect to all the libraries and stuff. It's all the same.
Yeah,
all the consortium stuff.
Yep. Any other questions? Yep.
Can we talk about the Scoundrels series?
Oh, yes.
Happy birthday, happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, to talk about how, it started out, I read it in order, Lion's Daughter, Captains of Night, Lord of Scoundrels, Last Hellion, and the Madrill's Bride. Sort of, did you imagine them like as a series when that started? How did that happen? Especially since the characters kind of intertwine so beautifully.
I didn't. When I wrote The Lion's Daughter, I fell in love with the villain. And so he had to have his own story. And then the Lord of Scoundrels just meteor strike. It was that just came to me. And it was a way also I could attach it, I could bring it to the other book because I knew that the hero from Captives of the Night was going to be in Paris at that time. And so that worked in really well. But I did not plan a series. This was just one story resulted in the next story. Sometimes that later I started planning things, the dressmakers, the Carsingtons and the dressmakers. I knew it was going to be a series. But that first one, I really didn't. I was learning. I was learning how to write historical romance, and I was in that transition period between the early historical romance, like Kathleen Woodiwiss and those authors, and then what happened a little bit later when Jane Ann Krantz started publishing as Amanda Quick. So I was in the middle of that transition, and that changed, I think, a lot of our perspective on historical romance. We said, oh, wait a minute, we can write these a little more like traditional regencies where it's a little more compact, but there can be sex. And yeah, so that was what happened. And then I think after that, though, I was a little more organized. For a long time, I was actually writing outlines for my books.
And Birdie, I mean, where did Birdie Trent come from? Birdie. Somebody.
He just the sidekick, there's so many examples of that, like in literature, where you have the smart guy and then you have the dumb guy, and there was Birdie, and I loved doing. Someone told, what was Jimbo? Himbo. Himbos, but that's it's when you create someone like Dane, and then of course there has to be someone like Birdie. I again,
Of the balance.
And Bertie is such an irritant. He's like this thorn in Dane's side. I loved that. He was just torturing him. Dane's trying to torture her by being mean, by destroying her brother, and meanwhile the brother's destroying his sanity. I love that dynamic.
The question about series, I remember you telling a story where what you call it the trilogy that had 5 books.
The costumes.
So that even when you plan Friends,
Yeah.
characters walk in and suddenly you're like, ooh, what about that?
Yeah, and then I had people asking me about the one brother that I didn't write about. I'm sorry, he had a happy marriage. I just couldn't.
Anybody else?
So I'm just curious, I always like to hear you sort of referenced the interesting things that are happening in historical romance as a genre now, and so I'm curious to hear who were the authors or what are the books that you think are doing interesting things in this moment?
Mimi Matthews.
Yes. Amy is wonderful.
Evie Dunn.
Edie Dunmore has done some, I don't know what she's doing next, but
Elizabeth Everett. I'm not up to them.
Yeah, Joanna Lowell,
Joanna Lowell, that's it.
yeah, short thing, which came out last summer.
Yep. Erica Ridley's pushes some boundaries and done some interesting things.
Joanna Shoup is doing those.
Oh, yes.
today.
Oh,
The Building.
She was gonna be at rom-coms.
Sorry.
I wasn't sure if that was still a secret. I've been afraid to say her name for your bursting out.
Courtney Milan.
Oh, she's been doing it all along.
Yeah, that's why she left traditional publishing. To do that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, she's brand new. She's brand new.
No, she's not. She's on.
Liana Del Rosa?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I only know the 3, the Mexican.
She had a series before that.
Oh, okay, good, see?
This one is very good, much better.
Yeah, I just got the thing. Yeah, it's just open to a whole lot more. And people are more inventive than. Not me, but other people.
Yeah, I have to stay in my lane.
Yeah.
Because that's the one I know, and people have asked me if I would move into a different era. And at this point, maybe earlier in my career, that would have been reasonable, but at this point in my career, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me because I have acquired so much knowledge and so many thousands of books. To
Stick with the historical.
yeah, and I've learned, and of course, right now, the 1830s, I love doing the crazy clothes.
It's so good.
It's such an interesting fashion era. But there are a lot reenactors and costume historians who've been doing the clothes, the big sleeves and the big skirts and the big hair, and they do such a beautiful job. Do you see there? I know, it's amazing. It's the stuff. And
Bridgerton's got nothing on those people.
No, they're so beautiful, and there's some French reenactors that have done dances, and they're waltzing, and you really get a sense of how beautiful the clothes were. They're crazy, but they're really beautiful. And when the women are walking, they seem to float, and there are these beautiful blends of colors. It's really beautiful. But I also like the fact that the women made themselves so big. They're taking up space. And then that's how it starts to droop as you get towards the Victorian era. So they've still got the big skirts, but up here, where the brains are, it's going troopy instead of, yeah.
There's a lot of metaphors.
Yeah. Yeah. So I like that. And also, as I've said, I've acquired the books and I'm constantly finding interesting things in there. And I used some of that in the current story as I did in previous stories, you know, discovering what kinds of entertainment were they going for. And so there's the Regent's Park Zoo, which was a big deal, but it was only rich people were going there. And then you have the Coliseum. I have a scene in the Coliseum, which was a big deal. And I think it was still in existence well into the 20th century.
What was the place in the dressmaker series? In the second or third book that they go to?
Tell me the place.
The like Vauxhall? And it's just the place they went and hung around and she saw the girls on the horses and wanted to be like them.
Oh, yes.
This is the second or third.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, for a while.
Vixen and Velvet.
Yeah.
They went to Astley's.
That's
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and the woman on horseback actually existed, Wolford. She was a very, very famous equestrian. Which unfortunately, after her husband died, she stopped doing it. And she erected this incredible memorial to her husband, which we saw at the Kensal Green Cemetery in London.
Oh,
It's way over the top. It's just so elaborate. It's this like Egyptian thing and there are all this like designs on it and there's this big epitaph on it about how wonderful he was and he was a genius, et cetera, et cetera. That was a very interesting story, just that he married this talented equestrian and she had this amazing career and then
it's like a requirement to be buried in a London cemetery, isn't it? Like how over the top is your memorial going to be? It's what mythological creature is going to be on top of you? A pelican eating out the breast.
yeah, it's like everything chicken
They're like,
thing,
yeah.
yeah.
Load it up with everything. World, are you giving us the times out?
Maybe 5 more minutes.
Okay, any more questions?
I have a follow-up question. So, you referenced earlier, Caroline, just sort of some of the things you would like to write about that are historical events or historical sort of moments or places, and some of the places you're just referencing that are real places. And I'm curious from either or both of you, are there things that you're like, you don't know what the romance is going to be or the plot yet, obviously, but are there like things you want to incorporate into your next book that you're like, oh, this would be a really great, this doofy dress I saw a picture of on a fashion plate, or a location or something that you're really excited to try to incorporate somehow into a future book?
Yeah, I've got a house that's torturing me. It's a house in Dorset.
Okay.
It's from I love these Tudor era estates. And it's this amazing looking house and I'm thinking, but it's in Dorset. I like to write London. And I've been trying to figure out how to put that together. How to put that.
We need not in This is one thing I love about Loretta's books. You're reading something, you're like, it's incredible. Oh, that's so over the top. Oh, that's real. She didn't make that up.
It's the house. I'm not sure how I stumbled on it, and I thought, oh, because the Camberley Place, it was based on Sutton Place in Surrey, and when I saw the pictures of it, I love that the way the houses are designed, and it's not a box, which is one of the things I like about it. And so you have so much potential for setting scenes. There are rooms and sections of the houses that are separate from other sections. Things like the Tudor era houses often have those long galleries, which was like so great for that scene in A Duke in Shining Armor, where he's in a wheelchair. Yeah. That kind of thing gets me excited. Location is often a starting point. I mean, location, Lord of Scoundrels, Dartmoor was the place, and the hero is Dartmoor. There's
he's setting as a character.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes. You're so like, we were talking about the clothes earlier, I was thinking, yeah, the number of times clothes have played a pivotal role
Mhm.
in your book, like usually as, you know, they get into it. And the hero cannot possibly get her back in good order because the clothes are so impossible, but like the scenes of him like, you know, fiddling with the sleeve puffs, trying to get them back into position, and he's like, it's good enough, and she's like. But like you really bring in all that detail, like I, you know, didn't have a good picture of, you know, what the dress would look like, but as he's taking it apart. And then trying desperately to put it back together or behind a curtain and, you know, whatever. She's like, yeah, it's supposed to look like this, I see this dress perfectly.
It helps, being able to talk to the dressmakers at Colonial Williamsburg. They are so amazing, and even though that's colonial era, America is their thing, but they do research on everything, and they actually make clothing for different eras. So they've been amazing sources for me, and the fact that I can watch them put things together, and they'll talk about putting things together, where they get the fabric and the work that's going into something, and that sort of thing has been amazingly helpful. I cannot speak highly enough about Colonial Williamsburg and their historical interpreters. They really know their material. They're historians, they're scholars. I attended a costume symposium. I mean, there was a guy who was making a copy of Washington's inauguration suit, and they're talking about finding out what kind of buttons would go on the suit, and they're looking at the kind of stitching it would be, and all the work they're doing is by hand, and they're using the same tools that would have been used in the 18th century. I mean, you can't. Very few places where you can get a better perspective on history than that one. So even though it's not my era, I love it.
So, I mean, my mother taught me how to sew. My mother was, you know, grew up on a farm, whatever, so I learned a lot of old fashioned stuff. But dressmaking is still strikingly similar to that. I mean, obviously you don't have to sew it by hand anymore, but a lot of the same methods and tools are like, it's not, like I'm watching videos of them making it like, yeah, I know how to do that, I know how to do that, oh, I even know how to do that. And so, I mean, it's incredible, the works that they churned out, there was definitely an appreciation for buying handmade goods back then, it's kind of died out a little bit. But I think what you're seeing in Colonial Williamsburg is not gonna be that different from what they would have been doing 30, 40,
Right.
years later.
Yes, that's because they're still doing it all by hand. But they're still, you know, fitting it to your body. And that was a revelation to me because I always assumed that all the dresses were made from patterns, but that was not the case. When they talk about a pattern, they're just talking about a design. They're not talking about pieces of a pattern. And to watch them piece the dress to fit the person. Again, a revelation for me. But with the dressmakers, yes, it was absolutely because I asked them, you know, how different would it be? And then, well, no,
Not very.
no,
Yeah, they would have had different
it's a
fabrics,
different, right?
different silhouettes and.
Yes, the shapes change, but the methods don't change very much. I can't sew very well, so I'm envious of it.
Yeah, the most amazing thing to me is the lace. The lace is also all handmade. And who was it? Was it Shana Galen, I think, who wrote a book where the heroine and her family, they were lace makers in Spain. And they, I think it's the Survivor series. I love that series from Shana Galen. Anyway, I forget which book it is. Don't ask me, but go look. I can find it. And it's like a key part of the story. They're making this lace, and she goes into how they, you know, like the pins on the pillows and winding the thread around it. I'm just like, I would make like 2 inches. Done. Check that one off the bucket list. I'm never going back. And they were making yards of it. Amazing.
And it was really popular. It was so, that's one of the things I noticed when I was looking at my fashion books. everyone's got that lace, the blonde, what they call blonde. And I love making fun of the fact that, but it's black. I ran into this with a copy editor. Black blonde? Yes.
Kind of thread, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it was a
blonde
type of
part.
lace, yeah,
Yeah.
right. It was very popular, and I'm thinking of how expensive that was. And it really gives you a sense of how the privilege of the people, the characters in our stories. And when you talk about no one does.
Serious income inequality.
Yes, but you're talking about that kind of fashion, that kind of attention to fashion and the handmade detail. That's why it's only haute couture now. It's you have to be a millionaire to afford these clothes. But the workmanship, there's still people who are doing that hand embroidery and is still sewing on the sequins one by one or attaching jewels to the. This is another thing that's hard for me to wrap my head around. They have actual jewels sewn into their clothing, pearls and diamonds and emeralds and not like 3. Yeah,
I don't even know.
and the dressmakers told me that the labor is very cheap, but it's what they're paying for is the fabric.
Yes, the labor of women.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in this country, it was mostly enslaved women that were doing the labor, at least in a lot of it, yes, yeah. But they were paid, they were paid pretty poorly, the seamstresses, the people who are doing part of the stitching, and that's another thing that you try to distinguish in the books, because a seamstress and a dressmaker are not the same thing. So, we're getting very nerdy here. Love it.
Two nerdy girl history talks and like,
Yes.
I would have thought them to be like, can I be like the half a nerdy girl? 2 and a half. I'll just stick here with my pom-pom.
Well, wow, thank you so much. So Loretta